Well, welcome everybody. It's Gordon Stone here. I'm the Director of the Agri-Business Development Institute, and I'm joined by David Stone, who is our Operations Manager. And believe it or not, we're a father-son team. And if you can see those smiling faces there, you probably see the genes might have played out better for him. So Dave, welcome.
Thanks, Gordon. Much appreciated, and welcome everyone to the webinar.
Okay, so we'll get going, and the first thing I'd like to do is to explain to you why it is that we're running this particular webinar. Dave will introduce himself in a moment, and so will I, but the reason why we're doing this is essentially because this was a presentation that we both gave at the Young Beef Producers Forum in Roma, extremely well received, simply because a lot of people said to us, it's good to see or hear and see another family talking about how things actually play out in their family business. So our objective in doing this is to share our experiences in business, a few warts and all, and a few good things, because we'd certainly like to be able to assist and pass on our learnings to our clients and others. So during this process, it'll be largely a presentation from ourselves, but there will actually be what we call a poll. So early in the piece, Dave will actually explain what this poll is about, and there's some key questions that actually encapsulate exactly what it's about to be involved in running a family business. Because our objective in doing this is to help people, and we'll talk a little bit more about our clients and some of our own experiences, to set up family businesses, which is still the backbone of agriculture and still the backbone of the small to medium enterprise sector in Australia, deal with family dynamics. So family businesses are a core of our operations in Australia, so therefore family dynamics either can be a problem or an opportunity. So with that in mind, this forms part of the Agri-Business Management Program, which our company runs in association with Meat and Livestock Australia's donor company, AgForce, Department of Agriculture and Fisheries in Queensland, and also the mid-tier accounting firm Crowe Horwath. So just to conclude our introductions, myself, I've been working in the agri sector for almost close to 30 years across a whole raft of different sectors. I've worked internationally in Asia and also in the USA. And interestingly enough, the family dynamics that we talk about here play out in every one of those countries, although I have to say in Asia with some cultural differences and so on. So Dave, would you like to introduce yourself to give us some insights into the second generation of the business?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Gordon. In terms of my background, I guess grew up in Toowoomba, or outside of Toowoomba in Queensland, and then left home to go and study at university in Brisbane. And that was not related to agriculture. That was actually environmental management and environmental consulting. So worked in, I guess, large multinational businesses for probably a decade. And as happens with people who have a link to agriculture, it tends to call you back in a way. So I guess that's what happened to me. I was looking for a bit of a change and how I could get back into the industry and an opportunity came up to get involved in the family business. And I guess there was a degree of trepidation about that because, you know, you sort of do know that these things come with their own sets of issues, but it was also a degree of excitement as well because it was very much aligned to, I guess, my family values and also my area of interest with where I wanted to take things. So that was, a few years ago now. So we've sort of had a few years to get a few runs under our belts and, work out what works and what doesn't work. And I'm looking forward to, I guess, sharing some of those things with everyone on the webinar today. So thanks for joining.
Great. Thank you very much, Dave. And so what we always do is give you a sense of, on the next slide, which I just moved to, of our agenda for today. So essentially, there's three elements to this conversation. First is the context, and that's actually the business that we're in, is helping people think about creating a high-performing business. So we'd like to define what a high-performing business is, what it looks like, what it feels like. The second thing is, as I've already said, the backbone of so many businesses hinges on how the family dynamics actually play out. So we want to talk a little bit about the family effect and what some of the attributes and potential issues might be. And then thirdly, deal with some of the questions around how we actually manage this. And we're going to talk largely about our own experiences. We're also going to talk about some of the experiences of our clients and what we also share in our programs. So this, believe it or not, is a fundamental tenet to our business management programs, because so many people who come to our programs are in family operations, whether it be husbands and wives or partners, or whether it be intergenerational, or put into the mix, sons, daughters, and spouses and parents, all sorts of permutations and combinations. So part of this is our experience, and part of this is the experience of other people. And it's really designed to hopefully provide you with some thoughts and insights about how to do all this. So, Dave, I'd like to just hand over to you, because this might be a good time for us to try this poll out on people and see where they actually sit in these dynamics.
Thanks, Gordon. And just before we get into that, I just also wanted to let people know that this is actually this is following on from a presentation we gave at the Young Beef Producers Forum in Roma in Queensland last year. And I guess one of the reasons we wanted to rerun this topic was because there was a whole bunch of young beef producers in the room, and really good feedback from a lot of people that participated. But what was even more encouraging to see was all of the young people that came up and spoke to us afterwards and said, look, thanks so much for sharing those things. These are some of the things we've got going on in our business. What do you think about that? What sort of ideas do you have that has, things that have happened in your business which could actually lend itself to their businesses? So I guess that's a bit of a context for why we're doing the topic as well. But in terms of this poll, I guess we'll get into it. It's a bit of I guess it just offers, it's a multi-choice question. You can actually you can list a few different responses, but we just wanted to get a sense of what types of issues people are actually facing in their businesses related to, I guess, that family effect that we're talking about. So it should just come up on your screen now. And what you should be able to do is actually choose any of those relevant options below that actually apply. So the question is, if you work in a family business, what are some key business issues that you're actually facing? And the options are A, succession, B, communication, C, accountability, which is, I guess, people doing what they say they do and actually delivering on it. Clear roles and responsibilities, so definition around who does what, and then getting everyone on the same page, which might be about, where the business is going, all of that sort of stuff. So if you just take a bit of time to actually complete that poll, and then we'll show the results afterwards, and it might give you a really good insight into, the fact that a lot of other people are going through the same things as what you're going through. So please just take a bit of time. I can see that there's a lot of people completing that now, so we might just give you maybe another 30 seconds to complete that.
And the reason this is a bit important to us is when the results appear, that gives us a context in which to frame the rest of this conversation. So Dave, I'll hand back to you.
Yeah, that's fine. And I can see most people have probably just about voted now. So I'm just going to go and close that poll now in about 10 seconds. Okay, I'm just going to close it now. And I just wanted to share the results, which hopefully you can all see on the screen there. So there's a pretty even mix across there, which is probably to be expected. Interesting that accountability probably comes in a bit lower, because in our experience, that's something that is a big challenge in family businesses. But I guess there's fairly even results across the rest of the board. So Gordon, did you have anything else you wanted to talk to about that?
No, well, yes and no, I suppose, Dave. And I'm really interested that accountability has come in a little bit lower, because for a lot of people, succession is something that's on their minds, but it's something that they are a little reluctant to get started on, simply because it might open Pandora's box. Communication is an important thing, but it is something that we're going to cover off in a few minutes, simply because one of the things that does tend to happen is that people gloss over communication, and yet that's the thing that can make things come unstuck. Roles and responsibilities, we find, is an area that, if it can be defined more, and we will be covering this in a few minutes, it can actually help people get a sense of where they fit. And then that actually fits right back to accountability. And so the final one about getting people on the same page is it's very important, because so many people come to our programs and they say, look, one of the fundamental problems we've got is we think someone's driving the bus, but we're really not sure exactly where the bus is going. And sometimes we wonder whether we're going to get off one bus and get onto another bus. There's a lack of clarity. So that brings us back to communication, being clear about who does what. And then the accountability thing is a big one, because if people take on their roles and responsibilities, it's important that they sign up for the responsibility and they are actually given accountability. More on that in a couple of minutes. So thanks, Dave.
No problem.
Right, so we better get started. So, Dave, would you like to start off with the this first section around a high-performing business and a bit of thinking about the definition?
Sure, and I guess the context for this is, the title of the webinar was Growing a Business in a Family Setting. So fundamentally what we want to do is identify, okay, well, if you're looking to grow your business, what is, I guess, the definition of an effective business, or in this context, a high-performing business that we should be aspiring to when we're actually looking to grow the business. So we'll probably run through a few elements of what a high-performing business looks like. And then, again, we're coming back to the growth process. So if we've got that idea of what a high-performing business is to actually aspire to, what's the logical sequence that we can take and a logical process we can go through to actually get to that point? So we'll just sort of kick this off, I guess, with talking about our mantra. So it's what we refer to in all of our programs, and if you've attended these webinars previously, you'll definitely have heard of us going through this in the past. But fundamentally, the mantra is we're looking to create high-performing, self-managing, saleable or investor-ready and profitable agribusinesses. So each of those have their own definition, and they do mean different things for different people. But high-performing, I guess fundamentally it's an effective business that's meeting the needs of the people who are running it. Self-managing is really important, because you can actually set up a business that runs without you. Not only can you afford to spend your attention units elsewhere, spending time on other things in your life, but you'll actually have a business that continues to perform and continues to deliver consistent outcomes while you're not actually in the nuts and bolts of it. So saleable and investor ready is an interesting one. We get a lot of pushback at this element of the mantra. Talking about saleable and investor ready doesn't necessarily mean that is what you have to do. You don't have to sell your business. You don't have to get an investor in your business. But the thought behind this is you're actually looking to set things up from the beginning in a way that if you did want to undertake that or did want to go down that path, that your business would be set up in a way that maximizes the value both now and when you actually undertake that transition process. And profitable, obviously that's a fairly obvious one. And again, that depends on what you're looking for from your business. So we keep coming back to the idea that you have to be really clear about what you actually want out of your business. So that's probably my summary, Gordon.
Sure. Dave, something I'd like to add to this is, because the title of this webinar is a family setting, the idea of a saleable, investor-ready business is really important. And that is because once another generation comes in or once another generation goes out, they are potentially bringing their money and what we call the sweat equity, including their intellectual property, what their knowledge is, to the business or transferring it out of the business. And so it's very important for people to go, actually, if I assign a value to my labour, which might be paid for or in many cases not paid for at its true value, if I bring my mindset and my knowledge, and particularly if it's another younger generation coming in with experiences elsewhere, like Dave has described, then that intellectual property brings value. So for example, Dave will be talking about systems a little bit later. That's actually knowledge that he brought into our business and has applied value to it, because it allows both he and I to work on the business rather than in the business, which is a critical part of this process. So look, Dave, I just wanted to add that bit to that slide before we move on. Does that suit?
That's fine, yeah. And I guess I'd actually like you to probably lead off on these next elements. When we talk about what a high-performing business looks like, the ABDI 12 Pillars of Business Best Practice really provides a bit of a framework for thinking of elements of business best practice you should be aspiring to in all aspects of your business. So, Gordon, maybe if you take us on a bit of a run through what these 12 pillars actually look like.
Sure, thanks, Dave. And for people who've been to these webinars before, they'll probably say, oh my God, I hear Gordon talk about this every time. So I'm going to put a slightly different spin on it today, and that is the context of the family. So it's no surprise that the first one of these is all about where is the bus going? It's about the vision. It's what is the end game that we're all working towards. So if you look at our poll, what people were talking about is, can we get everyone on the same page? Can we determine what the succession or the long-term plan is all about? So that's the first one. The second thing is about the marketplace, products, markets, and customers. So we've found, even in our family business, that Dave has got a different view about what our customers might be about. And I'll, to be quite honest and say, he is far more in tune with younger people than I am. That's not to say that there's anything wrong with my thinking, but my generation is such that I look at the world through a certain lens. He looks at the world through another lens. And it's no secret out there that a lot of younger people are quite wealthy customers. So why wouldn't we apply our minds to Dave's knowledge? Thinking and acting as a corporate. So that's simply a mindset. That's actually a way of thinking. And I'll be brutally honest and say his mindset and my mindset do need a bit of alignment from time to time. So for that reason, the communication that we talked about earlier needs to support our capacity to come and go from our particular mindsets. And he's had probably more experience than I have in working in a high-level corporate environment, and yet I've come and gone from a range of corporate settings globally over 30 years. And so we have to mesh those things together. He's talked about the money side of things, the profitability, because if we're in business for only two reasons, one would think: fun and to make a profit. End of story. And that's a mantra from Damien Street, is a corporate advisor and is a chairman of our board. That's the thing he always brings us back to. Why are we in business? To have fun and make a profit. Number 5 is about the people. So we're talking here about the family side of things, but there's actually a family I'm working with at the moment which is intergenerational, and now we've got some staff members in the mix. So one generation talks to the staff members one way, another generation talks another way. That actually sets up untidiness. So that comes back to our roles and responsibilities. Systems is the way of addressing a range of these things. And I think it's no secret in our business that probably Dave has a different view of systems to what I do. Thank goodness we broadly speak along the same lines in a systematic fashion, but our implementation process is somewhat different. And yet, for a high-performing, self-managing, saleable, profitable agribusiness, systems have to be king as long as they are fit for purpose. Business risk, legal risk, which are pillars 7 and 8, are self-explanatory. Succession, we prefer to call it business growth and transition, because as I've said already, the notion that one generation is going to apply its money, its resources, maybe its land, its knowledge, and in many cases is say to the next generation, I've actually got faith in you. I'd like you to step up and I'd like you to take the reins. That means the older generation has got to step back. But in many cases, that's millions of dollars worth of stepping back that they've got to do. Millions of dollars of assets maybe, or millions of dollars of debts. Or it might even be 500,000, but it's still a fair chunk of cash. Value adding and leverage is an important one because younger people are generally willing to go and talk to the customer. They're willing to collaborate with others. They're willing to get involved in sales and marketing, which is the next pillar, and they think about communication differently. So it's about this intergenerational mix of how the two of us are going to work together, two generations. So that really sets up the whole process about how things are going to occur and what the business best practice is. So Dave, I'm going to hand over to you to start working your way through this next slide. So I think the first thing you wanted to cover off is how do we grow things in a systematic fashion?
Yeah, sure. And I mean, you did allude to the idea of people with different views or different ways of doing things, bringing different thoughts around systems. And I guess we talk growing a business in a systematic fashion. So when I came into the business, I am the type of person that thinks in I guess, a very different way. I like to have a lot of structure, I like to see how things will play out in a hierarchical sense. So I need to know, okay, well, if the journey is business growth, what does that journey look like? What are the building blocks and sort of what's the process that we have to follow? So this, I guess, a lot of thought went into this. It might seem quite simple, but fundamentally, we're thinking about the business growth process as a bit of let's call it a pyramid. So at the top of the pyramid is business growth, which is number 4 there on the screen. And at the bottom of the pyramid is the foundations. So ideally what we're looking to achieve is, business growth or, the development of the high-performing best practice business. But before we get to that point, we actually need to set up the foundations. So we do talk about this in quite a lot more detail in the actual programs, and I'll only have a few minutes here to give a bit of overview, but there's quite a lot of component parts, as you can all imagine, because I'm sure a lot of you have spent some time thinking about all the different moving parts of your business, where the priorities are, what you should focus on first, and how to actually move this beast forward that is the business. So if we're thinking about foundations, this comes back to, I guess, firstly, it comes back to you at a personal level, which is, okay, well, what's my mindset when I'm approaching this business growth process? What sort of paradigm are you operating in? Are you the type of person that likes to think outside the square and actually, bring in new ideas and accept that, hey, you have to do things differently going forward? Because this is a big one, particularly with people in the program, is they spend the first day pushing up against all of their ideas around, what best practice or what running an effective business looks like. And after the sort of first day or the second day, or potentially even in the second workshop session, they go, oh man, I finally understand this. But what it required was for me to actually change my paradigm. And when we were referring to before about the whole saleable or investor-ready business, people actually understood that that's just a paradigm or a mindset that they had to shift in order to move forward. So that is one element of the foundations. Another element of the foundations is really around having really clear direction and vision for where the business is going. Gordon spoke quite a lot about that, so I probably won't go into it in too much detail, but fundamentally it has to be something that comes first before you can start trying to put the component building blocks on top of the vision, because if you don't have that direction sorted out at the beginning, the actual vision is difficult to take shape. The next element, I guess, is the internal business management practices, number 2 there. So you can actually see that that's sort of the second level, and it's getting the internals right within the business. That's largely broken up into 3 components, which is around thinking or operating more like a corporate, which is around much more formal management controls. It's also getting the financial management aspects of your business down pat, and then also we move on to the human aspects of business, which might be thinking about, again, succession, thinking about how you engage with others in the business, thinking about how you actually manage staff, contractors, personnel, family. And then once we've sort of got that area sorted out, we move on to the engaging, I guess, externally with the marketplace, because unless you've sort of got the foundations internally in the business right, you shouldn't, it's difficult to actually go and start spreading the word and, trying to engage as many people in the marketplace if you don't actually have definition around who your business is and, what, I guess, your unique offering actually is in the marketplace. So then after we've, sort of got all of those foundation component parts right, that's when we really start to focus on the business growth side of things. And that red circle that you can see on the screen is, it's attributable to those first 2 foundations. And the red circle is really around what we're talking about today, which is the family aspects of running a business. The family aspects of running a business that we've talked about really come into those bottom 2 layers in the pyramid. sections 1 and 2 there, because they're absolutely fundamental. You know, communication, engaging with other people in the business, having a clear vision and direction. So I think I'd probably wrap up there by saying that the summary there is that if we don't get this right, then it's really difficult to actually, you know, grow the business going forward.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. And look, before we move on, just for those of you who are visual people, look at this slide. Presumably, if you're on your computer or you're following up this later, if you're on the phone at the moment. The reason we call this a pyramid is simply because, as Dave said, item number 1, the foundations, is where a lot of effort is often put. And it's about a lot of the fundamental thinking and mindset change and all that sort of thing. And then the second component is not quite so big, but equally important. And that's the management controls that he mentioned. And of course, you're going to have to be out there in the marketplace, which is level 3, engaging with customers and selling products. But if you can get those foundation and internal elements right, it makes the sales process a lot easier, or the customer engagement process, because fundamentally the only time we make money is when we actually sell a product to a customer. And then our whole proposition is that the pointy end of the pyramid, which is number 4, if you can set everything up well, it sets the capacity to grow the business up very, very effectively. So Dave, look, I just wanted to I guess recap on that before handing back to you to start talking through part 2 of this session about the family effect.
Okay, thanks, Gordon. So part 2 is, as Gordon said, the family effect, which is just something we coined because it's definitely, you know, operating a family business is much different to operating. It appears to be much different to operating a conventional business that you might see in, you know, in an urban area or in any area for that matter. But I guess that the 3 elements we wanted to talk about were assumptions, emotions and family dynamics, and informality. So they're probably the component parts of where I wanted to go with this particular discussion. So if we just move ahead and we get into the idea around assumptions. So because family is generally familiar territory, we often make assumptions about others and about things in the business. As the saying goes, to assume is to make an ass out of you and me. And typically what happens is, because you make these assumptions about, you know, because you've grown up with these people, you feel like you know them very well, you often get lulled into a bit of a sense of complacency. And this is a really dangerous place to get to because it stops you actually asking the important questions. So what happens over time is, you know, people grow and change, spouses come into the mix, what people want actually changes. So if we're not continuously having the conversation and having the proper communication and dialogue about these sorts of things, we can get into a lot of trouble. We're talking there about, you know, we all know what everyone else is thinking of them and us. And again, that's where I said before, we can't just make assumptions about this sort of stuff. Often in disharmonious family settings, sometimes when there's succession processes that aren't going that well, people are making assumptions about other parties. But the real reason that this actually occurs is that people are probably afraid of actually having the difficult conversations. So we have to force ourselves to actually have those difficult conversations to get everything out there, and just to make sure that, you know, all of those underlying reasons why people are doing things come to the forefront, and we can actually have a proper conversation and not make assumptions. The final point there around, we all have everyone else's best interests at heart. I mean, we don't want that to be a negative statement, but it's really important to understand that in family businesses, you know, while people do have the family unit, you know, at the forefront of their mind, everyone has their own drivers and their own wants and needs. And that's just human nature. There's nothing wrong with that. But the challenge comes when not everyone is aware of where everyone else is at with what they're looking for. So I think probably an important way to describe this is actually my own journey into this business. When I joined, I had come from a big corporate, so I knew everything that there was to know about, you know, big systems and, you know, working with 30, 40 other people in your team as part of a 10,000 person organization. But coming into a small business, I mean, I had no idea about how to run a small business. I had no idea about, less of an idea about the ag sector, and I had less of an idea about, running types of programs that we run. That's fine. That's what happens when you come into a new organisation. But I made the assumption right from the beginning that, well, Gordon or Dad's been doing this for such a long time that he must know exactly what's going on. He must, he would be knowing all the right things to do at all of the time, and he'd know the right way to do these sorts of things. Fast forward a couple of years with a few more runs under my belt, I'm actually in a position where I can really, I can think critically about this stuff, and I actually know that there's quite a few things that we could do a lot better. But if I wasn't willing to actually ask the question and challenge the status quo, and similarly, if Gordon wasn't actually willing to have the conversation with me, we'd lose out on that, the real benefits of having, people that are quite close to you from a family perspective. So I think the idea around challenging assumptions is really important.
So. And Dave, I'd like to chime in there, because from the older generation's perspective, it can be a bit challenging to hand over the reins to somebody else. On the other hand, if you're a person like me, you're actually looking to see, your own flesh and blood step up. And so sometimes it's not that easy to be able to encourage them to step up, because you also know, oh, geez, can I just be 100% sure this is going to work, because this is something critical? Can I just step back? And sometimes even I've got this gut feeling, and we actually had this example play out where I had a gut feeling about quite an important personnel matter, that this was just not going to work. And I just, despite Dave saying to me, explain yourself to me, I couldn't really explain it. It was just, 30 years worth of experience. So I actually had to just go, look, I have to step back from this one and just let it play out however it plays out. And then Dave did actually say to me some months later, well, now I actually understand what you were trying to articulate to me, but I equally now understand why it was so damn hard for you to actually speak those things. So it's a two-way street between the generations. And this comes back to our poll question about communication. It also comes back to our poll question about roles and responsibilities. Because I'd have to be honest and say there are things in our business that we are still getting the roles and responsibilities and the accountability right, because they are relatively difficult issues to deal with. So Dave, look, I think we probably ought to move on to
Sure.
Point number 2 around the whole emotion and family dynamics, which is just a really good lead on from what we've just talked about. So maybe hand back over to you.
No, that's fine. Thanks, Gordon. So I guess when we're talking about this, the idea of emotion, anyone that's in a family business knows that emotion is a big driver behind decisions frequently, because I guess business decisions often affect the family and vice versa. So what happens is when, I guess, emotion gets introduced into decision making, we've said there, it sort of brings out the grey areas. We want, if we're thinking, let's say, financial management, you can achieve very black and white decisions there, but there's other areas of the business where it's a bit greyer, and then adding emotions into the mix actually takes things to another level in terms of being in the grey area, because it really, I guess it can, as we said there, clouds rational judgment. Sometimes the rational decision that makes good business sense might not suit someone in the family, and it might be that they can't articulate why, or it might just be that they flat out say, I'm not going to entertain that idea. So often it'll get bypassed in favour of something else. So it can really actually undermine, business decisions that actually make really good business sense. And when we talk about family dynamics, it's a bit harder to articulate, because generally family dynamics is the things that are happening in the background. Every family has their own set of underlying dynamics, and it's about how everyone engages with each other. But it's often, it's about why people do what they do, but it's driven by, in some cases, 60 years of doing things a certain way, or, it's about that engagement process behind the scenes, or underlying drivers between different generations. And as just some examples, people would know this. It's why, for example, mum in the business is the only person that can bring the dad around to a new idea, because if anyone else tried, it'd go nowhere. Or it's why potentially, two sisters just can't get along, but no one really knows why. It's just because there's a lot of family dynamics at play there. And just really quickly, I thought about this earlier today. A perfect example of this is a time that my younger brother and I actually went backpacking in Europe for 6 months. So we'd been on the road for probably 3 months, and we were best mates. We were having the time of our life. There was not, we'd never disagree on things, or if we did disagree, it was like, yeah, whatever, that's fine, let's move on. And then Dad actually had a conference over in Europe, in Italy, and Mum came as well, and we all joined up as a family unit to spend a week together. Within probably, I think it was the first day or the second day, my brother and I were at each other's throats. And we couldn't explain why. It just kind of happened. And then obviously we were big enough and old enough to sort of step back and go, holy smokes, how did this play out? But because what happened is, as soon as we all got into that family unit again, those family patterns and family dynamics started to play out all over again. So I guess it's just something to be really conscious of when you're thinking of operating a business in a family setting, because there's lots of underlying drivers which need to be thought about and really need to be aired. So again, we come back to the communication side of things. And that last point there around, do you treat family as you would treat any other co-worker? This is a really big one that for me personally, because I know that I have huge expectations, or very high expectations of Gordon. That's fine, because that's my own. Viewing him as a father figure, expecting him to sort of know what's going on all the time, is just, again, one of those underlying drivers that you have to think about. But the question I have to always ask myself is, if I had another coworker that just was a person, that just a colleague, just someone that I didn't know that well, would I be expecting the same things of that person as I would if they weren't family members? So it's an interesting thing I continuously have to step back and think about, because it actually helps me, get a bit more of an objective sense of where I'm going with things. So Gordon, do you have any comments there?
Yeah, just some quick comments. I'm just keeping an eye on the time here because we've got a little way to go. But like, the whole thing plays out vice versa from the older generation's perspective. And that is that you're also wanting to hand over the reins. You're also very aware that some of your thinking is a bit old school. And so it's just like, and being the father, you've always cared for your kids. But now they're adults, and now it's actually time for them to stand on their own 2 feet. So it's just, what is the middle ground sometimes between this child who's now an adult and this father who is just busily trying to hand over the reins, what one would hope is, and trying to help that young person step up. And sometimes there is the father who just gets a bit tired and worn out and goes, I'm not actually 100% sure what the hell to do here, because while I've got a whole lot of experience under my belt, sometimes things are unknown, and we're in a fast-moving world today. And back in the day, things were a bit slower, and sometimes you've got to make quite profound decisions quite rapidly. So look, I'm going to gong that off, probably with only one other observation that I'd like to make, which is, this conversation has been about what can go right, what can go wrong. How do all of these things play out, and what could potentially become a bit of a mess? One of the things that I talk about in the program, and this was actually explained to me by a bloke I know and respect and have known for probably about 20 years. And he'd sent it to me many, many times. And then one time I heard it and I thought, bingo. And it resonates with people in our programs as well. And that is, just remember that a good batting average is for 6 out of 10 things to go well. 4 out of 10 things may go not so well. And if that's the case, then you just got to say next. But sometimes in the family setting, saying next can be loaded with all the dynamics that we've just talked about and some of the emotions. So on that note, Dave, I'm going to, I guess, hand back over to you about this next issue about informality and how that all can play out or not play out.
Sure, and I will, I guess, go through this relatively quickly, just watching the time. The third part is around informality. I mean, it's no secret that because of relationships with family members and generally the setting that you operate in, family business settings do lend themselves to informality. And the examples of that are that, you'll have important decisions that get made over around the kitchen table, as opposed to actually taking the time to set it up, to have a proper conversation about these types of things. And also it's just unavoidable that, you'd think it's unavoidable that business and personal things just become intertwined. So what this, I guess, manifests in is, really being really clear who actually does what. Are there formal roles and responsibilities in the business? Often, as we said on the poll, that was a big one. A lot of people said that was an issue that they're facing. Accountability, we've got that again, because I guess in family settings, if someone doesn't deliver on what they say they were going to deliver on, ask yourself, what are the repercussions there, really? Again, if it wasn't a family member, you'd probably come down on like a ton of bricks if they weren't delivering on what they said they would do. Or, you start performance managing them and you say, okay, well, if you can't deliver on what you say you're going to deliver on, then it might be time for you to move on. Those types of things typically don't happen in family settings. So accountability and I guess repercussions and implications of actions is something that often gets overlooked because it often goes in the too hard basket. And I guess just a very quick little story about that from my perspective. We recently made some decisions in our business that, in order to help me elevate and step up, I would start taking responsibility for some different parts of the business. So each month we have our board meeting, and there was something that I was responsible for delivering, which was my new responsibility, and I hadn't done it. And so Damien, who's Damien Street, our board chair, he said to me at the board meeting, he said, well, why haven't you done it? And I said, because I haven't gotten around to it. And he said, well, mate, this is your responsibility now. You need to be delivering on this. And if you don't deliver on it, then, there will be implications. And that was probably what I needed to actually step up and start doing things. So it was really around that clear conversation around roles and responsibilities, but also about accountability and repercussion. So that's Gordon. I guess that's my summary.
Yep. Thanks, Dave. And so the other side of this is that in a family setting, you've got to be very careful about being overly hard on other people as well. So on the one hand, you can be soft on them. On the other hand, you can be overly hard on them. So the question is, what's the balance? And then there's that whole accountability issue too, which is you can be hard on people, but the question is it fair and reasonable to do that? Did they even know that they were accountable for it? Did they even sign up for that level of accountability? So there's some of the things that we'd like to now move on to briefly in the third part of this session. So fine for us to outline all the problems, many of which you might already know, but hopefully we've started to give you some insights into things that we talk about in our programs and our work with clients, and that we'd like to share with you here too. So we're breaking the next part up into some of the things that we have found ourselves make a big difference. That's not to say we're perfect. We've found that they make a difference for our clients as well. So the first thing is, not surprisingly, who is responsible for what? Have we even defined what the roles are? And have we defined within those roles exactly what are fair and reasonable responsibilities? So how do we do that? The first thing is actually to create an organizational chart. And people might be listening to this and saying, we've got 3 or 4 people in this business. What are you talking about? Well, our experience with ourselves and with other people is, for example, I'm the CEO, but I'm also responsible for what we call alliance partners, people that we work with very closely and keeping in touch with them. I'm responsible for delivering workshops. I'm responsible for a whole raft of other things. So they are actually individual roles and responsibilities. So they sit in the organizational chart. Making this real, there's a family that we've worked with, and the husband finally understood, for example, that he was very, very good from a production point of view. But we also discovered that he was particularly good at engaging with their clients. And they happen to be a stud operation. And so that means that he's taken on now the role and responsibility, and it's defined in the organisational chart. There is actually a job description around it. There are actually key performance indicators around his job as engaging with the clients. And I didn't even hear this from this particular guy, Dave did. He said, mate, I used to hate coming into the office. Now I look forward to coming into the office because I know what I'm responsible for. I know what my key performance indicators are. I know specifically what the expectations are, and I'm ready to step up. So Dave, that story, is there anything you'd like to elaborate on? Because it was actually said to you rather than me.
Oh, only that he said, I used to hate coming in the office, but now I can actually see the opportunity that comes from focusing on that. So he said it's completely changed his mindset, and he's much more comfortable in terms of what he can actually achieve by spending that time focusing on the business as opposed to the production side of things.
So what's that's about then is clarity. And this is more admin, it's more work. But the thing is too, if there's going to be any form of performance management, but if there's going to be an orderly, self-managing, saleable business that's profitable, it's about people working efficiently and effectively on the things that they're responsible for. And they can only know that when we sit down and work it out and when they sign up for it. So that's really that's one of the key take-home messages for us in our experience and working with our clients, that this clarity, so we take out the ambiguity and so on about who does what and what they're responsible for, is one of the biggies. The second thing that we've done and that we bang the drum about quite extensively is the value of an advisory board and management meetings. So on the one hand, we'd encourage people to have their weekly operational meetings, toolbox meetings, whatever you'd like to call it. But on the other side of things, if we go back to our 12 pillars of business best practice and say, we've got a long-term game plan and we actually need to work out, heaven forbid, the strategic plan or the business plan for 5 to 10 to 15 years hence. And for many people, this is a big thing to go, right, we could actually have a game plan that is clear about where we want to go. It's not something that is just that hangs nebulously in the thin air between the generations or whatever else it may be. It's something that we've actually all agreed to sign up to. And there might be a degree of risk, but those sorts of things then guide the advisory board and the management meetings to say, this is our intention. Our intention is to go on this journey. That's what the roles and responsibilities are about. That's what the communication is about. That's what the accountability is about. That's where the CEO is driving the bus. So, and other people might also be stepping up to become the CEO in waiting or the operations manager in waiting or whatever it may be. So the beauty of these meetings is that people can start to step into these roles, hence the value of the formal agenda, hence the value of the documented minutes and outcomes. So using myself as an example, I'm the chair of the advisory board of a number of our clients. So my job is to actually say, look around the room and go, we have had a discussion about this item. I'm about to write this down as a decision that's been taken and write that down that defines who is going to be responsible for what. And so that's actually the third dot point here about the independent chair becoming the circuit breaker. Because basically, my job is I'm not that interested in the family dynamics, but what I am interested in is what the family has signed up to do. So that being the case, my job is to do whatever is required to corral the family and say, if we've agreed that we're going to do this and we're in the meeting right now, we've worked out a plan of attack, is everyone agreed? Bingo. And that takes us back to accountability. So Dave, is there anything you'd like to add, because you get right in the thick of our advisory board meetings?
No, I mean, the only comment would be that the use of the chair as a circuit breaker has actually been really useful for us as well, and it actually is one of the key drivers behind me actually coming into the family business, because I knew that there would be someone in place that could actually cut through what potentially could be like some family issues that might come up in a business setting. So it was really important from my perspective as well.
Thanks, Dave. And look, before I move on, that's a bit, I was very keen on that idea, but sometimes I get a rap over the knuckles as well. So that's just the way this stuff has to play out. Everyone's on the bus. So anyway, let's move on. The third thing, and not surprisingly, it's about the bus. It's about the direction. So what we're on about here is most of the things that we've talked about already. How is it that we get everyone on the same page? How is it that we become clear about what the common direction is? And how do we know where everyone stands in this whole process? Well, that's where the planning comes in. That's where the regular review comes in. That's where the regular open discussion comes in. That's where the clear roles and responsibilities come in. That's where the accountability comes in, because inevitably the direction is going to be a little bit hard to work out. Inevitably, it's not going to be a straight line. In fact, I had a meeting with some clients this morning, people who are actually graduates from one of our programs, who said, we've actually done so much good work in the last 12 or 14 months since we started the program. But now we've got to a certain point where we've done step one of the plan. Now a part of the problem we've got is, where are we going to from here? We've got some ideas, but we just need to get them to land. And so now what we're going to do is put in place another advisory board process to say the discipline from here on in is to get clear about the direction and get clearer and clearer about the vision. But we've actually given ourselves potentially 3 to 6 to 9 months to get the next part of the grand plan clear. So that's, I guess, my final point about part 3. Dave, anything to add before we start wrapping it up?
No, that's fine.
Okay, so in terms of a wrap-up, what's this all been about? So what we set out to do was to provide a sense of how it is that we might go about growing a high-performing, self-managing, saleable, profitable agri-business in a family setting. So we know there's great power in a family. That's why we've been looking at the family effect and recognizing that if, as Dave said earlier, we've actually all signed up, not just for, we'll call it a financial outcome, but for the greater good of the family. That's where the sum is definitely greater than the parts. One of the issues with families is we often get derailed with all the negatives. And we sometimes get involved in succession activities where we tend to focus on the train wreck, all the things that can go pear-shaped. What the process is that we've been dealing with here is focused on is the positives. So how can we just get the best out of all the people who are involved? And that fundamentally comes down to point number 3, which is, and I know I married into a grazing family, I'm a city boy, and what used to amaze me is in this family, things would swirl around in the ether, and people would just there'd be a series of grunts that would go on, whether it was in the yards or whether it was in the paddock, and there'd kind of be this stuff swirling around. And because I was the outsider, I had no idea what was going on. So my job is to ask the questions and get clarity. And sometimes the brothers and the father would even be a bit unclear about what was going on as well. So part of my job is kind of the circuit breaker in this process. And my 4th point is what we've been trying to get clear about is someone needs to drive this bus according to the vision that's been created. And if the goodwill, the communication and the clarity is all there, that will help get things heading in the right direction. And the more it can get fine-tuned through the advisory board meetings, independent chairs, all of those sorts of things, people being self-accountable, that's where the vision can be realised, all the positives can be valued, and we can be clear about where things are going to from here. So Dave, before we conclude, what other thoughts do you have to add to all this?
Nothing too dramatic, other than we've been talking a lot about, father-son or intergenerational family dynamics or family settings, but this stuff is equally applicable if there's a husband and wife team driving a business, because there's a lot of drivers and underlying things that occur in relationships between husband and wife teams as well. So that would be my comment.
And that's actually a very good point, because also there's another family that we've been involved with that are siblings and partners. And so exactly these same dynamics play out there. So let's just now draw this to a close. What we've been talking about here are some examples of the things that we cover in various levels in some of the programs that we run. We have a 12-week business by design, business intensive, where we dig down into some of these fundamentals. So it's about understanding these 12 pillars of business best practice. It's about giving people a rapid insight to how these business operations might actually play out for them, so that we have greater knowledge about these business operations. We've also been talking about our 12-month program, and this particular program is the one where a lot of change actually occurs, because basically over a period of 12 months, the people that we've talked about and used examples of are the ones who say, look, I'm actually up for some significant change in the business. I'm actually looking for a way to almost be held self-accountable to the decisions either I've made or I want to make. So part of the job is to help them get clear on where they want to take their business and then start the change process. And that's where the business mentoring comes in, which is part of our job, is to mentor people through the change process and deal with the confronts that come up that we've talked about. And also, in fact, this couple again this morning was saying, it becomes a bit lonely out there when you're actually talking about the same old, and all the things that can go wrong. Whereas if you can get in a group of like-minded people, because this is a group program that we're talking about, you get in a group of like-minded people who are all on a journey of change. They all want to go somewhere different, and they all want to grow their business, and they want to take a very organised approach. And we've seen it ourselves, the change that happens in people that comes from this kind of process. And I suppose the final point is that we're also involved with the Queensland Ag Training Colleges in a farm business management skill set program, which is fundamentally about dealing with creation of a business plan, which we would always advocate as being a really important way of getting clear about driving the bus towards a common direction. So Dave, before we move on to the last slide or two, anything to add?
No, that's fine.
Okay, so in conclusion all, if you'd like to find out more about what we've been talking about here or talk to us, you've got a phone number there, 0746152255, which is our number, email address, website. We've just done yet another briefing of the Ag Force and Department of Agriculture and Fisheries people in Queensland. So feel free to give those guys a call as well. Or if there's anything you'd like to have a chat about, just give us a call and we'll go from there. And finally, of course, just reminding you all that this has been an overview discussion. So in conclusion, thank you all for your attendance. We hope this has been able to help you think through family dynamics. We'd like to encourage you to give us a call if there's anything we can do to help. If not, our objective simply was to share our experiences, to give you some insights into things that might help you, some of the unconscious things that might have been going on. We've maybe brought them to consciousness, and hopefully we've been able to pass on some of our experiences. So Dave, I'll hand over to you to close things.
No, okay. Well, thanks for everyone for joining us. It's been really good to talk about these things, particularly as it's something that often doesn't get talked about. So with that, I guess we'll end the webinar there. So thanks everyone for joining. Oh, yeah.
There'll also be a little exit survey or a little poll at the end. So if that comes up, if people could give us a bit of feedback, it just helps us to become clear about things that we could do differently and better, recognising this has gone on for an hour, which is a bit longer than we normally do. So if you'd like to give us some feedback, we'd appreciate it. So thank you all for attending, and we look forward to chatting to you sometime soon. Cheers.